first, let me thank both of you for joining us, Denise and Sonia. But I'm really interested in learning a little bit about your journey. So, what has led you to have such passion around helping leaders navigate change and lead for high impact? Denise, we'll start with you.
I think it started more on happenstance. What we see is that if you read everything, it's going to take some 200 years before women find equity. And yet 50%, 51, almost 52% of the population, a working population, is women. And so we talk a lot about the glass ceiling. We talk about why can't they do it? We talk about a lot of reasons and barriers, but the solutions are not coming forth. Most HR people are still using the same playbook that was written in 1950, and it does not reflect the needs of the general population that we have now, whether it's women, people of color, neurodiverse, et cetera, as well as this amount of change, which we're going to talk about today. And so being a person of color and being someone who did hit the highest, C-suite for several companies, I really started focusing on what is necessary from a mindset point of view, because women don't get the same kind of coaching, they don't get the same kind of information that men do, so that they can rise and lead their organizations in the most powerful way.
I love that, Denise. Thank you so much. And let me just say, you're making such an impact, such a difference. So thank you for the work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Sonia, what about you? What led you to helping leaders navigate change and lead for high impact?
I think it's sort of similar to Denise's explanation, but my journey was different because I came in the business development side and I was in technology at a time when there was very few women. I remember after being in the organization for 4 years, I was able to be promoted into what they call major accounts. And literally what I was told was, well, you're the second woman allowed in major accounts. And I thought to myself, that has got to change. That cannot be the path anymore. So and I actually got a deal with my boss at the time, and I said, and if I'm successful, I'm not the last woman in major accounts. So by the time I was able to actually, spend 16 years in the industry, I'd realized that we still only represented about 10% of the actual force, when really it was because we were not mentored, we were not developed, as Denise said. And often I would be asked by HR to meet with anybody that was incoming or to speak to new people that were applying, because it was using me as an example of, hey, you could also achieve this. And I thought to myself, I've learned so many things along the way. I wish I could spend time with emerging leaders on a consistent basis to actually give them the tools of the trade and just say, here's the roadmap. Here's something to think about. Here's what you have to unlearn. This is what you need to learn. And that's when I decided to become an executive coach. And I feel so grateful that I've been able to do that with leaders consistently. It's like, I feel like I save them time, I save them stress, and I help their organizations achieve their goals.
I love that, Sonia. Thank you so much. And you certainly have an incredibly impressive track record of success in doing just that. Now, one of the most important questions that I think you can ask as you're navigating a period of intense change while leading for impact is around vision and purpose. What outcome do we want to achieve, and why does it matter? And how does this change fit into our long-term vision? This vision will serve as kind of the North Star during a period of uncertainty. It helps us guide decision-making. It helps keep teams focused. So Denise and Sonia, how do you help teams grapple with these questions as you begin to the process of navigating change? How do you help teams develop a clear vision, defining really kind of a compelling vision that aligns their organization's mission? Sonia, let's start with you.
So, when I think of vision, when I think of like environments that I've been in where the vision was very clear, everybody all the way down to the janitor knew why they were there. They knew how they contributed to it. They knew what it was about. And so I guess I'll say is I normally start with, obviously at the C level, and say, okay, when was the last time that you had a meeting in which you actually empowered the people that were there to be able to have the honest discussion about what it is that you're doing? Who is it that you're really impacting? Because in many cases, I found that companies were focused on our product or our service. And I said, no, how are you enhancing the lives of those that actually come in contact with your business? What is it that you're trying to actually change? What's the impact? And so that started a whole process of being able to have those kinds of meetings and have it cascade down. The ability to be able to get that down so that a person who's doing their job, and I think for me, I learned it a lot at HP because there was a practice there of being able to do profit sharing. And when you have profit sharing, everybody knows how I spend my time will affect what that check looks like when I get it
Right.
in June and when I get it in December. So that's an approach that I take.
I love that, Sonia. Thank you. And Denise, how about you? How do you help teams develop a clear vision, defining, again, that kind of compelling and motivating vision that aligns the organization's mission, especially in times of tumultuous change?
You know what? I think it starts with obviously the C-suite and the board. And it's most of the time when I'm called in, it's because they're too close in the weeds. They're looking too much, our brain is focused on solving problems. And so all we see is the problems that keep us from doing what we want or the challenges that are in the way and not always doing that. So I often find that strategy for them in terms of what the vision is, it's not as difficult for them to get through. I mean, there's some work and exercises, etc. But the issue becomes how do we implement that? And that, as Sonia has said, is the piece that always gets left out because they think if they put up the board and this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, they cascade goals down through an organization. Everybody's going to understand what that means and what they need to do. And one exercise I love doing is I'll ask the C-suite, okay, so who do you think your customers are and describe them, make an avatar of them. And then I'll ask people on the front line and say, give me an avatar of who your customers are. And then I take that back to the C-suite and they're like, what? Because the
Yeah.
reality is they think they know who the customer is, but they rarely actually interact with them. And so they don't know who really is buying the product. They're dependent on the staff to come to them and say, this is who it is. And usually the staff is the people who are directly under them. And guess what? They don't really talk to customers either. So bringing in that front line to have a panel after we do the exercise, then we bring the front line in, have a panel, and the C-suite has to sit there and listen to them and say, who are the customers? What are you facing? What does it look like? When they come in, what's the life in it? What stops you from being able to make decisions in the moment? Where are we doing, really, really well? What could we do better? And keep it on a positive note instead of digressing into what's wrong and what's in the weeds. And both sides now come out with a completely different perspective on not just where we're going, because a vision describes when it's done, what does it look like well, but the milestones that allow us to know that we are moving consistently towards that, even in the midst of turbulent change.
So smart. Thank you so much, Denise and Sonia. That was great. Now, for leaders in the midst of significant change, and they're thrust into new challenges daily, what are a few strategies that can build adaptive culture, right? Adaptive culture. So how can leaders cultivate a culture of learning, of openness, of resilience, encouraging their teams to embrace change and adapt to challenges rather than resist them? That's really kind of the essence of an adaptive culture, is a culture of learning, a culture of openness and resilience. But how do you encourage teams to embrace that kind of culture and embrace change and adapt to challenges? So Denise, let's start with you.
I think it depends on, first thing is I have to understand what their culture is, but I'll give you an exercise that anybody can actually do. Everybody has staff meetings, whatever that means. And one of the best leaders I ever had, I actually had two that kind of did something similar, is at the beginning of the staff meeting, they would ask, What went wrong and how did you solve it? The first thing that does is it causes people to become more aware of what's going on in the organization. It gives them the courage to speak up about what may not be going well, but it also forces them to have to think about how I made a difference. How did I turn that mistake around so that everyone can learn in the room? One, it's okay to talk about things that don't go well. Two, you should expect some things that are not going to go well. And three, you can learn from each other and build the support, the psychological safety in the organization so that people understand that it's not the problem, because the problems are always going to come, but how do you show up for them and how do you react to them? And so there's a discussion around, tell me emotionally, how did you handle that? What were your boundaries? And so there's kind of a list of 3 questions I give depending on the culture. And if I ask them to use that exercise, and then they come back to me and talk to me about what they learned, what they found, and what would they do different.
Oh, so smart. That's absolutely beautiful. Really brilliant. Thank you, Denise. Sonia, how about you? How can leaders cultivate a culture of learning, founded on principles like being open and resilient, and help their teams actually embrace change rather than resist it?
One of the tools that I used at the very beginning was a 360 tool that actually had analyzed what were the actual competencies that were missing or in short supply at the very top that could affect people's ability to be successful. And one of them was comfort with ambiguity. And so I basically have a workshop that I do on, so how are we mastering ambiguity and what does that actually mean? Because and Denise alluded to this, our ability to talk about problems that we've had and how we've solved them matters. But when you haven't actually sat down to look at what other things, be curious, be open to figuring out, I can probably be doing something in an adjacent place. I think because I started in technology when the pace of change was going so fast. And it was not unusual for 6 months from now, that product that you thought you were going to be able to sell is not going to be relevant in the marketplace anymore. And so it was about the fact that you had to be able to get comfortable with ambiguity and then be willing to, and that requires that you empower people down the line to be able to make decisions because you can't be controlling everything. It's really about decentralization.
Yeah, gosh, what a great insight. Thank you, Sonia. That's absolutely right on. Such great insight. Thank you. Now, I really believe that all leaders want to believe that they're leading to create high impact, right? They cherish the opportunity to feel as though they're able to move the needle. They want to believe that they're able to stay results focused, even in the midst of significant change. And even if that's not the case, I think that is a motivating force for them. That is a focus and a motivating force for their leadership. So what steps can leaders take to clearly define measurable goals and outcomes so that they know if they're on pace? So if they know they're actually creating impact or they're faltering. So how would you help leaders clearly define measurable goals and outcomes? Again, keeping the focus on the impact of the work. How can you help leaders prioritize efforts and sustain momentum, even in times of tumultuous or rapid change? And Sonia, let's start with you.
So one of the things I think is important is being able to examine, you know what your business is, and then do you need to reposition your business? Because one of the things that I find is, what you measure is what you get. But are you measuring that which really applies to what can create impact today? So part of it involves being able to understand, what are we measuring? Is that what we should be measuring in the midst of all this change? Denise was talking about the fact that things have changed so significantly. Most people exist in organizations in which they have a particular model that may have worked phenomenally well 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But now the rate of change or what they're needing to do is going to be different. So it's like, so if we were repositioning the business and we were actually starting from scratch, what would we think is important today? What is it that we need to actually be paying attention to that will affect us today and tomorrow? I worked with one company with the CEO when the goal was to be able to either be bought or to actually go public. And, they were so excited because they had all these high-end clients and all this kind of stuff. And I said, do you know who your real top 10 clients are? And are you actually treating them as your top 10 clients? And do you know where your actual losses are and where it is that you are not matching resources to, what you're delivering? And he said, no. I said, okay, let's go do a study. Let's analyze this. And when we sat in the room, everybody was like, we didn't know that. We didn't know that. And therefore they were able to reposition themselves and then focus on what it was that was relevant today.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Sonia. And a lot of your advice and guidance, I think, is just as applicable for entrepreneurs. It's just as applicable for solopreneurs, people that are coaches, consultants, advisors, mentors, coaches, as it is corporate CEOs that are running businesses that are multi-million-dollar revenue juggernauts at the top of their industry. Because I will tell you that it is so incredibly important to understand not just who your audience is, but what their needs are, what their priorities are, what the problems are that they're trying to solve by using your products, your services, whatever. So even if you are a solopreneur, I think those are some fundamental questions that we have to know, right? I love that. Denise, what about you? What have you done to help leaders stay focused on measurable goals and outcomes and keeping the focus on the impact of the work, even as they deal with times of rapid change?
I think the process that Sonia laid out is excellent in terms of getting everybody aligned and thinking about what the state of the business is at this point. But I think during the one piece that most people in general don't know and struggle to deal with is the emotionality of change. And so for leaders, because everyone is, the hardest thing for a leader is to recognize all eyes are on them. And anyone who's on a director and above is seen as the person who knows all, does all, can move all things, even though when you're in that seat, that's not true. And it's not true. So this idea of going through this turbulence when you are uncertain about what's going on is important. So one of the things after we kind of get what are your goals and what does the vision look like and kind of go through a process similar to what Sonia talked about is that the next thing that you have to think about is from an emotional point of view, how are you going to lead change? When your people are looking for certainty and there is none, that's hard when you're supposed to know everything, when the board doesn't know, when the investors don't know. It's hard to stay on your feet if you have not done some work, mindset work, in terms of being able to get through the change and walk through it. So a lot of the work I do is really about helping that leader understand and ground themselves in times of change, not avoid emotions, not try to not feel what's going on, to know the difference between emotions and feelings, to understand what uncertainty does, how they react to uncertainty, how other people might react to uncertainty, because no matter what, everybody's brain is the same. We are a heat-seeking missile for all things going wrong. Okay. That's right. Just it. You're going to see it because that's part of the brain that which is supposed to protect us. And so for the leader, you've got to not only be for yourself, but you've also got to work with your teams and get your directs and the people upside from director down, also understanding how to emotionally move people through the process of change. Sonia and I have talked offline, and we both read a lot of the same studies. I'm a practicing neuroscientist leader, and the thing we know is 1 out of 10 people will change, even if it means if I don't change, I'm going to die. Why is that? It's because change is hard. And what we often teach people are the steps and the measurements around change. But what we don't teach them is how to emotionally and personally move through the process of change, how to deal with failure, how to deal with unexpected things showing up, how to bring themselves back to being centered. And what does that look like? That's why when you do what Sonia said about setting those milestones in place so you know where you're going, those are critical things that keep the mind from diverting and going into we're off, because that's an anchor. You can constantly bring people back to, hey, are we on task? I know we don't look like, but how does it affect this milestone that we have? And can we move forward with that?
I love that. So smart, Denise, to bring in the emotional makeup of change, right? And to really focus on the fact that even though cognitively we may even have a roadmap of how to navigate change, but there may be emotional resistance associated with that. So smart. All right, we'll go through just a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience to have just a lively discussion and ask any questions. So I would invite everyone to start thinking about any comments or questions you'd like to add to the conversation as we get going. But just one more or two more questions that I think are so interesting. And one is about communication. I feel like prioritizing transparent communication is absolutely key in turbulent periods of change. But it's funny, at the C-suite, often we are advised and we are actually asked not to be transparent, not to disclose what's really happening behind the curtain. But I think it's always central to building high impact teams to be transparent. So there's often sort of mixed messaging around what you can disclose, what you can be transparent about, what really is happening sort of behind the curtain. And the fact that in order to build trust-based, high-performing teams, it's often the responsibility of the leader to have transparent conversations. So what tips and tricks can you offer to help leaders keep lines of communication open, honest, and regular? I really believe that when your team understands the why behind the changes, they're more likely to buy in. They're more likely to commit to new initiatives. But there's often, as I said, competing dictates from the board or from the C-suite about what you can and can't disclose. So what innovative ideas have you seen that really work helping employees create buy-in, commit to new initiatives, and allowing leaders to embrace this idea of transparent communication? Denise, let's start with you.
I think that everyone understands. And so when I go in and talk to teams and work with the teams, because I work with the entire team at any level in the organization, when I go in and talk to them, the first thing is we redefine transparency. It's not transparency because you can't know everything, but it is appropriate transparency. And so people have to understand what's appropriate that we can talk about and what we can't. And because most of the companies I work with are publicly traded, there's lots of things that can't be. And we have to remind them and educate the staff that there are just some things as a publicly traded company you just can't share. But what we can share are the ideas on where we're going, what the milestones are when we're on and off. We can talk about change in the environment. There are a lot of things you can talk about. Usually I find where we get into trouble with the transparency piece is because the leader hasn't taken the time to talk to their team about the context of the environment that we're going in. Again, most leaders are set on, I only have an hour or 35 minutes. They get in, they want to tell, boom, 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 give me some questions, what's going on, da, 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 which means they're taking in a lot of information, but they're not really giving a lot of contextual information. This is what we see. This is what we think is happening. Here's how what would you say? So instead of telling people, ask people, if we go this direction or this new technology comes in, how long do we think it's going to impact us, our customers? How do we prepare for that? How do we see that as a competitor? How do we think about what that competition looks like? I work in, one of my clients is in the mental health space. And so this whole idea of, telehelp was ridiculously difficult to implement. And people still don't understand how difficult it is to do behavioral health from a telehelp or in a Zoom meeting on it, because it doesn't allow for trust to be built so much. And you already are working with clients who don't want to disclose everything because we all want to look good, right? And so that's the same thing that happens, regardless of whether you're in a mental health facility or behavioral health organization, or you're in, McDonald's. Everybody wants to look good. Everybody wants to look capable and competent, and they can't do it if they don't understand the context of the business. What's changing, where we're headed, how do I know I'm going to get there? What do you see coming down the pike that I need to learn? So forecasting those kinds of things helps people deal with the pace of change. The other and the last thing I'll say is most leaders got to where they were because they were hard charging and just went in a straight line, right? When you have turbulent change like now, the one thing you have to learn above all other things is when to step on the gas and when to back off. Because we're human beings, we are not a car. And if you don't back off, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. You're going to have all kinds of problems. I often say it's like holding Jell-O in the summertime in your hand. Things are going to leak out from every little crevice, and you're not going to be able to control it.
Yeah. So smart. And I feel like, it's almost like a pressure cooker. If you continue to apply that pressure, at some point, it's going to explode. It's going to backfire. So that's such an important point. And also one of my Achilles heels, because I love change and I'm always pushing for change and it wears people out around me. So such good advice. So what about you, Sonia? What tips and tricks can you offer to help leaders keep lines of communication open, honest, and regular so that the team understands the why behind the changes and they're more likely to buy in and commit to new initiatives?
I really like Denise's approach about let's define what transparency actually is.
Yes.
One of the things that I often used to say was, okay, so the advice of what we cannot say, does that come from the attorneys and are they just helping us manage risk? Or if I was to actually get advice, so I always feel like there's two views. There's the view of how do you manage risk? And then there's the views of what do the people that are on the front lines want to know in order to be able to focus on their job and not worry. Because they can't see around the corner. They think we can. And therefore, I agree with Denise again. It's about being able to provide more context or more views about what's possible so that they can actually come to the conclusion of that would be a good direction. Yes, so they begin to see themselves as being in on it, understanding what it is that is possible, and then get used to it. Because again, Denise is right about the fact that in general, people don't really prepare for change or adapt to change easily because we want to create some kind of a sense of security. And in an ideal world, you get to the place where people feel like I'm in on it. I understand what's going to go on. I know how to be able to apply myself here. And I just go, it's about building those muscles. When you go to the gym every single day, you're deciding you're working on your biceps or you're working whatever. We're working on our ability to adapt. And here's one of the things to take a look at. Being able to see, what if you could see this? What if you could see that? What if you could understand this? And suddenly it's like you want to help them change the filter through which they're processing information so that they can then be seeing that as an opportunity and not a threat.
Yeah, very well said. I love that. All right, last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. But we have all heard about how important it is to lead with empathy and resilience. That seems to have been the catchphrase of the last 3 years, lead with empathy. And those tend to be two soft skills, actually, where most women excel: empathy, humility, and resilience. So we know that emotional intelligence and empathy build trust, And resilience sets an example of how to handle setbacks, how to handle, missteps, misfires, or even significant failure. So, how can leaders show understanding and flexibility, especially during challenging times? How can they really exemplify those leadership skills that we know really do lead to success? Empathy, I will throw in humility, resilience, because we know that they build trust. We know that they help create a sense of endurance, a sense of tenacity. But those are often skills that aren't necessarily taught in a corporate environment. So, how can leaders show that level of understanding and flexibility? And Denise, let's start with you.
I think this is one of the areas in particular that we need to upgrade our HR tools. Because learning how to be empathetic and resilient is not something you're going to learn in a 30-day training program. Okay. So we need systems and a culture that holds us in a place where that's allowed. And so the one that I work with leaders on is doing their succession planning and organizational planning in general. And so what I will say is bring in your high performers, bring in your low performers, because everything's on a bell curve, guys. 50% of your population is just above underperforming. So think about a bell curve, 50% are always below the high performers, right? If you could move one standard deviation of the entire population to the right, how much more performance would you get? To do that, no matter who you are, no matter what the business is, no matter where you came from, even if you're in the like industry, et cetera, it takes 3 business cycles for you to understand and to be able to be resilient. So I worked in a company where our business cycles were 7 weeks. I've worked in a company where our business cycles were 8 years. So you have to understand what your business cycle is, because the first year you bring someone in, or the first year they're in that role, they're just learning how to swim. They need to understand where the bathroom is, what's going on. They're trying to fix everything that was broken from the person before, or get a new project in if they're the first one in there. The second year, they're learning to live with what they put in the first year. So that's where resilience comes in. And that's where you're going to see how empathy and resilience actually shows up. And it allows you as an organization to be able to say, how do we help this person use these 2 skills to get through the 3rd year? Because the 3rd year, you now fix the problems before, you now understand the business well enough, and you now know how to apply your leadership skills in a way that gets you to move forward. For women in particular, the hardest thing about empathy and resilience is boundary management. Because too often, we are not clear about our boundaries. And I'll give you an example. If you go to a place, I have clients, African-American clients who are in rural parts of the country, and you go in and the customer refuses to talk to you because they don't talk to women or they don't talk to a person of color. What are you going to do? How are you going to hold yourself? How are you going to still meet your sales goals or your regional goals or be a regional manager so that you move forward? What are you going to do to change that person's mind? I've had to go through that so many times. I can now kind of coach people through it with my eyes closed. But it is a real factor that oftentimes we don't think about. We think empathy is, oh, I need to understand them. They don't like me. I don't know what to do because they don't like me. They need to like me. And they move on the like part when where they need to move into is the business part. Why does this person in front of you need you? What is it that you can do to change them? Because most of the time, you just need to show up. And if they don't, then you need to know what the next steps are. And so that empathy and resilience, 3-year plan or 3-year business plan or 3 business cycle plan, and helping whoever the leader is, what are your boundaries? What are you going to do in the face of somebody saying no? What are you going to do in the face of someone who comes in and is truly challenged and emotional in front of you? How much of that do you take in? Where do you move it? And also, if a person fails, how do you teach them and not teach them from what you did, but help them find the answers to move forward and the motivation to move forward.
So smart. I love that, Denise. Thank you so much. And those are such incredibly strategic questions that you asked at the end, really thought-provoking questions that I think all leaders should be asking themselves and grappling with. So thank you. And Sonia, what about you? How can leaders show empathy and resilience, especially during really challenging times?
So I think of when we want to reach people, stories really work. So our ability to connect to their story and be able to position stories that we have that may be relevant and can affect what's going on for them. I'm going to share something. So when I was in tech, and one day my boss said, Rufus is going to work for you. And Rufus was the only African-American man who actually came in to work and looked like an unmade bed. I thought, oh, Jesus, what's going to happen now? So I thought, okay. I said to my boss, okay, but I said, no, if Rufus is successful under my team, nobody poaches him. We got to agree on that. He was like, okay. So I basically took him to lunch, and I basically said, look, I need to be really honest with you, and I'm going to just share a story. And I walked him through a story because I wanted to see how much he would actually open up and explain to me what was going on. And at that point in time, he basically admitted that he was a drug addict. And I went, oh, that's great. And he said, really, why? I said, because I have solutions for that. I know exactly where to direct you to so that you can actually like be empowered to get yourself back on track. And part of it, I think, was because he was scared. He was scared. He was in a new environment. He was the only one that was there. He knew there was all eyes on him, both from his family and from the work about succeeding. And when I just said, like, let me tell you my story, and let me tell you why it is that I focus on what I focus on. And so he became very successful. He was one time he actually was on Oprah about how successful he became. But it's about being able to have people understand where they are at. You know, like when you're meeting somebody new and in their culture or in their environment, they don't take women's, with respect, or they don't honor their word or something like that. Your ability to, from a place of, real curiosity, come in with something that could create insight or opportunity for them might move them just off the needle. It's worth a try.